add value to your business, or do you want to just be this administrative person?
And often, if you look at your talent team and the caliber of talent in your company, they correlate.
You could hire the best person for the job if they were in your candidate pool.
All these individual employees, one by one, together, their voices all come together to articulate the culture of the company.
This is
Hiring on all cylinders.
Hello again, friends. Welcome back to your favorite recruiting podcast, Hiring on All Cylinders. I'm still Rob Stevenson at the helm, and I hope you are out there just crushing your open roles and filling your organizations with top talent and vaulting past your monthly, yearly, and quarterly goals. On this episode, among other things, we feature the triumphant return of Intello's Director of Customer Success, the liaison to the army of recruiters using our product, Lonnie Spratt. Lonnie, welcome back.
Hi, Rob. Hi, everyone. Good to be back.
Good to have you. OG podcaster. I'm so sorry that we kind of left you out in the rain all this time, but I have 3 microphones and I have a burgeoning talent team at Intello now to feature, so I'm sort of spoiled for choice.
Yep, but I'm happy to be here.
Yep,
and I've missed you all, podcasters.
I'm sure they've missed you back. I certainly have, and I won't take you for granted again, I promise. Our guest today is the CEO and founder of Get Lighthouse. It's an exceptionally powerful tool that helps hiring managers and team leaders conduct meaningful and productive one-on-ones that allow them to better develop and retain talent. Please give a warm, albeit delayed, and from our end, silent welcome to Jason Evanish. Jason, so glad you're here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rob.
So I guess right off the bat, I know you were worried about being too producty and salesy, which I love because I hate talking about the Intel product because there's no better way to roll your audience's eyes than do that. But just to give a little context, can you kind of give the elevator pitch of Get Lighthouse?
Sure. So as a manager, there's a lot on your plate, and so what Lighthouse focuses on is the soft skills that you often either don't know what to do or don't get enough time to really invest in. So we try to help you maximize the time you spend on investing on the things that actually drive motivation and retaining your team. Those are things like helping people with long-term career development and having awesome one-on-ones and remembering kind of the little things that matter most to your people as you get to know them as individuals.
And that often starts right away in the interview process, right?
It should. It should. I know every time I've recruited someone to the Lighthouse team, I'm literally building up information about them that I know I'll use if they join the team pretty much from the first meeting.
So in the well, I guess first before we get into that, why is having a meaningful one-on-one so important?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the reason that having a meaningful one-on-one is so important is because there's so many things that happen in the workplace that there's no other time to deal with. You ideally would have everyone just kind of crank out work and be super efficient all the time, but we're human beings and we're emotional creatures and we have all kinds of things that motivate us. And you need the one-on-one as a catch-all to cover these issues, whether you're talking about feedback and coaching for people or running ideas by them to get their buy-in before you run a big initiative, or it's just simple things like developing them and listening to things that are important to them or helping with interpersonal team issues. There's all these little things that build up that either you fix them when they're small or they blow up in your face, and that's when you have to go back to your recruiters and say, hey, I have 2 open spots because 2 people hated each other and left.
Right, exactly. It's really easy to slip into the one-on-one of, okay, what are you working on? For the manager to say, all right, where are you with this project? Where are you with this? How can I support you? Which is great, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of my one-on-ones historically have looked kind of like that. But it's not just a catch-up on the to-do list, right? Or at least it shouldn't be. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, status updates have no place in one-on-ones, in our opinion. You definitely want to talk about those things, but usually actually, your coworkers would benefit from the discussion. You don't want to be a bottleneck. So, Rob, I talk to you and you tell me what's going on in your project, and I talk to Lonnie and she tells me, but it turns out half of what you each told me you both need to know. The last thing I want to do is spend my whole time telling you things that you guys could have heard firsthand from each other. The one-on-one, meanwhile, is for all those private things that actually you don't want Lonnie to know or Lonnie doesn't want you to know, but we need to work through together.
Got it. Lonnie, being a team lead, hiring manager, who conducts weekly one-on-ones with the whole team, right?
Yep.
Could you, walk us through an outline of your one-on-one, and then we'll have Jason just eviscerate it?
Sounds good. I would love for you to do that. So I actually do status updates in some of my one-to-ones. So here's how
strike one, Lonnie.
I know, strike one. So here's how I think about one-on-ones. Sure. So I actually separate different kinds of one-on-ones. Okay. So my weekly one-on-one, I actually call it the weekly tactical meeting. And it's it's an opportunity for me to sync up with my direct report to understand key things that they're measured on and how we're tracking against those. So a lot of times we're looking at their KPIs. We're looking at, in our case, we're looking at where they are with their renewals. Are they having any challenging situations come up with their daily work with customers? How can I support them? How can things be escalated to me? So if you think about status updates, it's still a way that I'm getting information that's showing me where I can provide coaching. So that's the weekly tactical one-on-one. And so it's very like I call it very tactical. I also have a monthly one-on-one. And I call this, when I talk to our new hires and even in the interviewing process, I call the monthly one-on-ones, I call them the warm and fuzzy. Okay. And it's the complete opposite of the weekly one-on-ones. We do not talk tactical. We do not talk business. We do not talk numbers and KPIs. This is where I check in to see just how is your experience at Intello? What can we be doing to improve that experience? Where do you feel like you're not being challenged? Where do you feel like you're being too challenged? What's one thing that we can do better on our team? If you had a magic wand and you could change, stop or start doing something different on our team, what would that be? So this is a way for me, and I purposely do these outside of the office. So we do a walk and talk, we go for lunch, we go for coffee, we go for ice cream, just anything different to get out of the office, to get out of your tactical mind and thinking more warm and fuzzy and big picture. And so this is how I can keep my kind of finger on the pulse of what's happening with the individuals on my team. So go ahead and tear me apart.
Actually, I think that's pretty good. So what I would say is there's some nuance to when I talk about you shouldn't have status updates. So when I think about status updates, it's where are you at on this project, or it's what have you completed lately? I think what you're talking about is actually you have weekly coaching sessions with them, which I think is great. I think an important part of a good one-on-one is coaching and feedback and that sort of development. So actually, I don't really have a lot of complaints there. I think the one thing that I would add there that I heard was maybe mixing in on the monthly ones, making sure you're really kind of actively pushing on kind of the career side of things with them to say, hey, let's get actually tactical here on your career and say, where do you want to be heading? Let's make sure, are you on path? Are you further along than you were a month ago when we checked in? I think that's one of the important things that people miss out on. And actually, at some point, I'd love for us to segue and talk about this a little bit. But I'm curious, obviously I have no idea how the black box of Intello actually works to predict when people are passively looking. But I know, at least from the anecdotal evidence that we have through Lighthouse, when people feel stagnant in their career and they feel like they're not growing and progressing, that's when they start passively looking. And so I find that is something you want to have as a conversation, and you actually want to force the issue, because you'd be amazed the stories that people make up in their head about their manager that makes them afraid to bring things up, and then unless often you as a manager broach the subject first.
Yeah, that's great, because I think hold on, let me see where I was going to go with that. It was going to be, I really want to talk about the development part of it. Okay. That's really interesting, because I think one of the things that, yes, our algorithm does take that piece into, that's just one of the variables that algorithm looks at. But yes, if someone's stagnant, they are more likely to be inclined to engage with a recruiter or hiring professional. One of the things that we have on our team, because we are a startup, is I have something called a 20% project.
Oh, awesome.
And this is where, so you have your normal job, your day job that we actually hired you to do. And then there's these special projects that we need done on our team, but we don't have the luxury of hiring a full-time person to do this thing, because we don't have actually enough of work for this thing. We just need a little piece done. And so especially as people on my team mature in the organization, each of them will take on a 20% project. And so when I'm on those monthly one-on-ones, the warm and fuzzy ones, we talk about what things they're interested in, what can be more fulfilling for them. They could say, some of them say, it's just, might be getting a little boring or a little stale, right? Like you've been doing the same thing over and over and over for a year now, and they're just looking for something to kind of spice it up. And so then we start having those conversations of what's really interesting to you, what are you exploring? Oh, I really am thinking I might want to go into management, or I'm really thinking I might want to go on the product side. And so when I have these little projects, say, revamping our new hire onboarding program, for my team, well, someone that's looking to go into management, that might be a perfect 20% project for them. I'm not going to have to revamp my onboarding program every single quarter, but maybe once a year I'll need to do that. And so I can use that one-on-one to remember, okay, who on the team said that, they would want to do something, and how does this project kind of relate to them? And then so you're, as a manager, it's a little selfish because you're getting this work done that needs to be done on your team, but you're actually also giving an opportunity to someone on your team to grow. And they might love it, or they might find out, I don't think I want to go into management. And this was a really good little taste. Same thing like intern program. Yep. I really want an intern program, but I don't want to have to roll it out and do all the, but it's great for someone who is more junior in their career that might want to manage someone. Well, giving them, a couple interns to manage for a summer is very low stakes, and you yourself don't have to do it. And so it's like a win-win.
Yeah. I was going to say that. I don't think it's selfish. I think it's a win-win. And it's similar to what we were talking about before we started recording, Jason, which was that when a recruiter's interviewing someone, those kind of things that they might be interested in taking on, where they want to grow in their career, what they want to, maybe they haven't done before that they want to try out, that's something that early on in the interview process, a recruiter needs to sort of latch on to, and then communicate that to the hiring manager, sussing that out early on, like taking interview data and then making that part of the one-on-one, making that part of like the development plan for that person.
Yeah, you want to avoid making your hiring process a bait and switch, right? Like your goal isn't just to get them through the door. The goal is to have them stay and be successful. And I think one of the things that often causes that to fail is because there's a poor handoff there, or there's just not a lot of accountability on those things happening. And so what started as a promise, oh, sure, you can totally do that. And yeah, I'm sure you could do something like that. Those sorts of promises that get you all amped up about the company, start to get kind of frustrating 3 to 6 months in when you're like, you know what, this job isn't what I thought I was signing up for.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I was told that, yeah, I'd have this thing that wouldn't be fun, but I get to do these cool things. And it turns out it's just the not fun thing. That's where the misalignment happens. And then again, you're back in that square one where as a recruiter, you're like, oh, I have to fill that role again. And
yeah. So that actually, I'm glad you said that. I don't know what your target like buyer persona is, sure, but it doesn't strike me that many hiring managers or team leads would just say to themselves, you know what, I need to get better at doing one-on-ones. So then maybe they do, maybe I'm completely wrong, but it seems to me that it would be part of the talent team's responsibility, people who think about talent development and retention and these kind of things all the time, to educate and to at least put something like this on their radar.
So we end up working with kind of two groups. One is we have managers, and we don't market ourselves as like the feature that we are. We market them on the solution and the thing that we solve, which is essentially if you feel like you're an ineffective manager, you're struggling with certain things in your management responsibilities, maybe it's just because your team is big. We know that things like a really effective one-on-one can help solve that problem. And so, we focus on like what people are struggling with. And of course, there's the micro level where it's an individual manager saying they want help. So they come in and try, our individual manager trial. But then you also have, people in leadership and development, or people like across an HR organization where they're looking at the metadata and saying, wow, we have a turnover problem. We can't retain people more than a couple years. Or, we have a lot of young managers. I remember one of our biggest customers, when I talked to the CEO, he's like, we have 24-year-olds managing 22-year-olds, and it's going as well as you might think. And it's like, is it really the 24-year-old's fault? Probably not. No. They've had maybe one job in their career at this company, and now they're put in charge of people, and they're trying to be like, what does a boss do? And it's like, what are the examples you see? You got like Office Space, you got Dilbert, you've got The Office. Yeah. Like none of those are good role models. Like not one of them. I think you're hard pressed to be like, man, what could I watch on TV that would show me to be a good manager? It's like, there isn't really a lot. So like those role models may not be there, especially a hyper growth startup. A lot of times it's like, what was the founder good at? hacking together a solution and getting on Hacker News and like
Yeah.
getting into YC or something. Like some of those kinds of things don't necessarily put you in a position to be an effective manager. And so what ends up happening is you start to see those problems over time. Like I remember I spoke with a CEO of like a 50, 60 person company about a year ago. And he was telling me how he's like, I don't really have a lot of one-on-ones, but when I do, I end up having to give people raises because they always threaten to quit when I meet with them.
Whoa.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, well, it
So
turned
then
out,
he just stops having one-on-ones.
yeah, right. So he was very resistant to him. So he would only have them when people forced the issue. And it's like, when you're a 60-person company and you don't directly report to the CEO, like how bad does it have to get for you to be like, I need to meet with you?
Right.
So it's not
exactly.
surprising that like, he had this unfortunately very late lagging indicator of a problem. So go back to answer your question kind of at its root. The idea is that one-on-ones are the single best tool you have to solve a lot of very common management problems that you have very limited time to address. And so when you have some of these management problems, that's where we've come in and helped people. And that's why we're big fans of content. It's why we're thinking about how we want to help people on this podcast first, not just sell what we're doing. Because we know that there's so many of these questions managers have. And honestly, there's a little bit of a stigma. Like, do you really want to go to your boss and be like, yeah, I don't know that I'm a good manager? Like, that's a really scary thing to admit. You don't want to tell HR, like, is that going to affect your pay raise next quarter? You don't want to tell your boss they're really busy, like, and they may not be supporting you that much to begin with. So telling them you're struggling may be the last thing you're afraid of. So we end up being a really cool outlet for them, potentially, where they're like, cool, I can go somewhere, I can kind of figure some of this stuff out on my own. I can get confident that there's something that has some best practice and theory behind it, and really help them start to get on a better track and be more confident. Because sometimes it really is just like not being nervous yourself, because that nervousness can translate to your team.
So just thinking about the internal mechanics of a one-on-one, maybe this is a flaw in how I approach it, but I typically don't drive, right? And I mean, it's probably like obviously,
as an employee or as a manager.
So as an employee, as the
Okay.
person who is having the one-on-one had with them, right? So
Yeah.
my bosses have always been great about being like, let me put time in your calendar, and they say like, this is your time. How can I support you? But I'm not driving the issue. I'm not like, even though it's my time. So I guess my question is like, where is the onus there? Are you finding that a lot of people are like me, and that they would be happy to kind of like just be asked questions and be quiet and be like, oh well, I'm happy, I'll go do my work now. And if that's the case, then is it up to like the manager to drive that conversation, to spark conversation? How do you get people to open up, I guess, and make it a meaningful conversation instead of a standoff?
Yeah, so a couple things there. First, I would say that you end up with both. So like I can tell you myself, kind of type A aggressive person throughout my career, like I was definitely driving my one-on-ones pretty hard. Like I knew what I wanted. I was a product manager in like a past job. And so I was always talking to other people in the company. So often I had a list of not just my problems, but like, hey, I don't know if you know this, but you may want to go talk to so-and-so. I'm not sure, but like go check with them, make sure they're okay. Cause I heard a little something when I was talking to them, and
right.
I can't do anything about it outside my pay grade, outside my responsibility, but I feel like it's my job to at least let you know what I heard.
Yeah.
So I didn't like not tell anyone the building was burning. So I know that there's people like me that are proactive. There's definitely plenty of those people that are thinking about it, and we try and nudge them to think about more of what they could talk about. But there's also plenty of people like yourself that are a little bit more laissez-faire, or like introverts, very often are a little less comfortable in the one-on-ones. And so there's two things managers can do. First is just building more rapport and trust. It's like if we walk down the street and I told you have to go down the street to a stranger and tell them your career aspirations and your deepest fear at work, you're going to be like, no. But if instead I told you that your best friend at work, you're going to go up to them and you're going to talk about your deepest fear at work and your career aspiration, you're like, of course. And so I think one of the jobs of a manager, especially when someone first starts out, is to start to build that relationship. Find something you have in common. You generally can find at least one thing you have similar with them. Maybe you had a similar upbringing. Maybe you went to the same college. Maybe your favorite taco is the same. Like there's going to be something. And as you start to build those threads, it really starts to open up. Just think about like if you've ever connected with someone over like a favorite book or like a favorite sports team or something like that. Like there's this instant bond. Like I know like your old roommate Kyle, who introduced us, he is a big Celtics fan, and so am I. And so like that's something we always enjoy talking about. And even just that little bit of camaraderie can mean a lot. And so, when you think about that as a manager, finding some common threads and common things they're passionate about will make them more comfortable to open up on other things. And then part 2 is, as a manager, it is absolutely your job to ask questions. Like what you said you like to ask is fantastic, because that's a great way to always make sure they're thinking about the right things, you're not missing anything, and you're keeping things fresh. So like we have like over 100 suggested questions in Lighthouse specifically for that reason, because one of the epiphanies managers often has, like, wow, I never thought I should talk about all these things, but now that I do, I see how my team appreciates it.
Right, definitely.
So it's a two-way street, but it's still always a focus on the employee. So even if it's your manager asking questions, it's still about you.
Definitely.
I think that's great, and I think I agree with all of that. I think you have more powerful one-on-ones if you're able to build that relationship and that camaraderie. I'm curious what your opinion is on skip level one-on-ones.
Mm-hmm. I think skip levels are great. They're a great way for somebody who's starting to get a little more removed from the front lines to understand what's going on. It's also a great way to make sure that, like, as you're building an organization underneath you, that it's actually the habits that you want are being built. So when we talk to managers who are doing skip level one-on-ones, the most common thing we hear is that those meetings are to say, like, hey, so-and-so that doesn't report to me anymore, that now reports to a manager under me, I want to make sure they're getting the same treatment that maybe I was giving them to take good care of them. And then the other thing, again, is like, what signals from the front line are there? Because when you're 2, 3, 4 levels away from the front line, there's a lot you don't know that's happening in the company. And so it's a great way to kind of take the pulse. Like, I remember a year ago, there was an amazing profile on, I think, Brian Chesky over at Airbnb. And one of the things they talked about that he does is every single day he sits in the cafeteria with a different employee. And his whole goal there is to just find out, like, well, one, what do you do? Because it's a big company. But also just feel like he's always getting fresh insights from people firsthand, instead of, like, either the telephone game where it's distorted, or 2, you run the risk of politics where someone's polishing the information before you get it, which distorts your worldview.
Yeah. He's like taking in a temperature of the company, sort of.
Exactly.
So if I'm listening to this, I'm a recruiter, I'm head of talent, director of recruitment, dare I say. How do you figure out that you have a problem with your one-on-ones? Like, you hopefully they're looking at retention numbers and churn numbers and all that, and talent turnover. How do you figure out that, oh, this is a problem that could be fixed at a one-on-one level?
I mean, I think it's all about kind of like engagement and like motivation. What are you seeing? So there's a study from Gallup, and what it shows is that engaged employees are 21% more productive and 22% more profitable. So literally, if you had a team of 5 and you got everybody fully engaged at work after they weren't, you're literally creating a person out of thin air, out of their productivity, which is pretty awesome. And so I think when you think about those early indicators, I think you look as a recruiter, you say, wait, how many times am I filling that same role? If you feel like it's starting to be a broken record there's something going on.
Right.
And I think you also look at, how hard is it for this person to recruit? Because think about it, if someone's a fantastic boss, in my experience, fantastic bosses have a really easy time of getting people to join their team, either because the first time you meet them, you're like, oh man, Lonnie is awesome, or it ends up being that referrals are really easy. I think a potential interesting thing to look at, I haven't seen data on this, maybe you guys can comment, but would say, hey, if you're a company that's, tries to get internal referrals, looking to see where the internal referrals are strong and where they're weak may also be an interesting indicator, because think about it, if I don't like my boss, am I going to tell my friends to come join me?
Exactly, yeah. So sorry if this is a pedestrian question.
Sure.
What do you mean by an engaged employee?
Engaged employee means people like coming to work. They're not actively or passively looking for a job. And I think it's kind of feeding into things like Dan Pink's idea of autonomy, mastery, and purpose. It's like there is strong alignment between what they want out of a job and what they're actually getting.
Can a recruiter with an acute vision for these kind of things sort of like look at an employee, or maybe a manager look at someone and be like, this person is a flight risk, this person is disengaged?
I mean, I think there's definitely, like, obviously the best thing is to have like engagement survey data. So, you're using, one of those many tools out there that does this. One of the best things is to have that kind of data, because then you have like, oh, hey, look at this trend over time. This person's trending down, or this whole department's trending down. But absent that data, I think there's a lot of really great anecdotal signs that you can look for. I think, one of the best ones, especially when you think about Silicon Valley companies where there's a lot of pressure and long hours, that person that closes their laptop a little earlier than everybody else, probably is a little more frustrated. Do you go the extra mile if you're kind of annoyed at your boss?
Right.
Probably not. Or if you feel underappreciated or completely unappreciated, again, are you going to put in that extra time? So if you see someone who tends to, maybe not quite punch the clock, but seems like maybe they're a little less committed, maybe emailing a good bit less and stuff like that. Maybe they're just tired and you should check in on that, but it could also be an early warning sign that they're kind of like checked out a little bit. And so, I look for things like that. Also, you could obviously see things like body language. And, one of my favorites, actually, this is a cool story. When I was working at a company once, one of the managers was not particularly popular. And so we were going and we were sitting around a table for like all of us to meet. We were a small company. And I remember vividly because I just read a book on body language. And so I was like geeking out on it a little bit. And I watched as when they were getting ready to sit down, it was literally like magnets where literally everyone would position themselves away from them to the point where like literally they were sitting at one head of the table and everyone was in a semicircle around the other end of the table. Like there was literally like a 2-seat gap around them. Mm-hmm. And that was actually kind of a sign of internal tensions.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think if you know how to read body language or you know how to read situations, you can actually see a lot of those kinds of things as early warning signs. The only thing I would say is like, don't look at like one signal and say, oh, I totally know there's a problem. You want to get a little bit more context first. Like I think you ask questions first. You don't just jump to a conclusion like clearly there's a problem with Rob because he made a funny face once.
Right.
You want to say, no, actually I've looked at a few things and like looks like, hey, we should see how he's doing. Maybe he's just tired or something, but let's check it out. Here's the signals I've seen. You should ask and like see what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe I'm disengaged. Maybe I just had something, like I'm dealing with something personally. Either way, like
right.
Figure it out in a one-on-one.
Exactly. Yeah. You got brutally dumped last week. Like, you might need to just kind of collect yourself, or you might be like, man, that was the last straw. I'm so sick of these projects. I'm just going to coast to the holiday. Right.
Right.
And the only way you'll know is if you kind of start to have a conversation with somebody. And again, that's where the trust comes in, because if you have some trust with your team, you can safely go and talk about an issue and get them to open up and actually tell you, versus like, look, there is that challenge where people will cross their arms and lean back and say, fine, okay, yup. And like, it can be a little bit grating. It can be challenging. Yeah. And that honestly is one of the signs of like, how strong is your relationship? Are all your questions turning into one-word answers and like it's pulling teeth? That's a sign in and of itself that you may have some issues, or this person's just painfully introverted and you have to work on that.
Yeah, it reminds me of, so we use one of those tools I think you were talking about, Tiny Pulse, mm-hmm. and we have a different question go out, every week. And then, but we have some questions that are repeated. So like, mm-hmm. how happy are you at work is a question that gets asked once a month. Mm-hmm. And we look at, Tiny Pulse gives you industry benchmark. So you can see how you score on average as a company and then compare it to the benchmark against other companies. And we always try to strive to be higher than the benchmark, which we usually, I think 99% of the time are, but you can actually break it down by teams. Nice. So you could see like there's, okay, as a company average, we might be at like, it's on a scale of like 1 to 10, 1 being like about to quit your job and mm-hmm. 10 being like completely happy and engaged. And, you'll see like, oh, our company average could be like an 8.2, but like this particular department is like a 6.9, and like what's happening with, that particular department. And so we'll notice like trends over time where it'll be seasonal, where it's like end of quarter and like, certain teams have these numbers they're trying to hit and they're all stressed out. And then, and then the quarter's great. And so then the next month you see a big spike. We also saw a trend when we were in our old office. These are definitely startup problems, but when we were in our old office, we've completely outgrown that office, but this office was still in development and getting put together, and it was just hot, and we were just like crammed in, and like we were just starting to see our Tiny Pulse happiness scores like really start to decline, but it was the whole company, so we knew it wasn't like something that was specific to a particular person, and we knew it was a trend because we had that data. And then as soon as we move into this office, it's like skyrocket scores. So right. I think it's really great, like you were saying, to like have multiple data points, trended against the norm, right? If there's one particular person, that's going one way and then everybody else on the team is going the other way, then that's probably a problem. And if like they're closing the laptop early, all of that combined, then you have a good sign. If it's the whole team, then you know that there's probably something more at a macro level that you have to do for the team.
Mm-hmm.
I hope I'm not harping on this, but it really fascinates me, and I've been thinking about it since you brought up early on in this conversation, that idea about how you're sort of building a picture of someone and their ambitions and needs and what they want from a role from the get-go, from the phone screen, maybe even before that.
Yep.
And that's very perceptive of you, and given your role, but I would expect that of my recruiters too, right? Even if it's only in a handoff comment in an ATS. right? Any little thing that they pick up, like that's very valuable information. So what are those things that you can look for in early on in the interview stage that will help you retain that person down the line?
Yeah, so the first thing that immediately comes to mind is if you think about Reid Hoffman's book, The Alliance.
Yep.
I don't know if either of you have read
Chris
it.
Yeah.
Great book. Actually has some really cool recruiting stuff in it too. So definitely have some other Intello people check it out.
Yeah, I think we have a copy here in the office.
So anyways, one of the things they talk about in the book is the idea that like when you start at LinkedIn, they want to give you a tour of duty. So they want to say like literally, hey, in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, where do you want to be next? So like if it's a really ambitious career path, it may take you 4 or 5 years to get there. If it's more nominal role, it may be a 2-year path. But the idea is to literally from the day you start be pretty aggressive about that. And I found that to be really interesting and telling. And I think that that's something that comes up a lot because at least in my experience, most people when they make a career change, they're either in a, hey, I'll take any job I can get mode because they got to eat, or they're trying to be pretty deliberate, especially when you talk about passive candidates, those are usually people that are looking for something very specific. They want to change in a certain way from their past job. And I think that that's the kind of thing that can come up from the very first contact, because when you look at like, hey, who opened an email, or hey, who engaged us in like a first screen conversation, that's going to be the very beginning opportunity to start to learn these things. Cause it's like, you have a great job paying good money. That's very, especially here in the Valley, that's going to happen a lot. You have a great job paying good money. Why leave? Learning why they answered the email in the first place and why they wanted to talk to you, I think is a great way to start to lay that foundation and understand what really motivates them, because they've probably given it some thought and they know what those handful of things are that will make them want to take a leap and go somewhere else.
Yeah, definitely. That question, why'd you take this call? If you have a good job and you're in a good position, you're a passive candidate. Yeah. There's kind of an easy response to that, right? Like if it was me, it's like, oh, well, it's logical to cultivate lots of options and you guys are a cool company, and like, how do you dig deeper and get the real answer there?
I mean, I think that's where like, if you're familiar with like 5 whys root cause analysis. I used to be an electrical engineer way back in the day. That's my college degree. I don't really use it anymore. But one of the cool things we learned in that was the engineering process. And one of those things is 5 whys root cause analysis, because you start asking questions. And so, you may start out with a simple answer, but then you kind of you start to say, why is that the case? So like in your case, you said, we're going to see if this works. So you said, I like to keep my options open. Well, why do you like to keep your options open?
I'm trying to always grow in my career and see what's out there.
Okay, so does that mean you're not growing where you are now?
I'm really happy where I'm at. It's a good role for me, but I feel like it would be silly not to keep a pulse of what's on the market. Okay.
And so what kind of situation would make you want to make a move if you're so interested in the temperature of the market?
Something that indulged a lot of things that I value in my career. So like my creativity and opportunity for growth and for trying things I haven't done before.
Do you feel like you're getting that at your current job?
Are we talking about Intello?
Well, no. So you understand?
I guess it's role play. Yeah. So role play. I see what you're doing.
Yeah. So the idea is that if you weren't getting that at where you were at, chances are eventually we would start to dig in and realize the handful of things you'll say, hey, I value 5 things, and the current job I'm at only gives me 3. Those 2 you realize are the levers that you can pull, both to get them to sign to join you, but also then realize, hey, they just gave us the keys to the kingdom. Yeah. They told us
that was like a 3-move checkmate there. So.
Yeah. So it gave you this idea to suddenly say, okay, I know exactly what this person wants. I know what we need to watch out for. I think the challenge is often that information gets a little siloed. Like you guys said, the recruiter may find out a lot more of that. And then as a hiring manager, the question is, how many of those questions are you asking versus you assume the recruiter did that? And you're just like, is this person a fit for me? Which is great. But, like you've talked about how you, Lonnie, spend time in your one-on-ones with what's important to them. It's like how much of, your interview process as a hiring manager are you looking at also not just are they a fit for you, but are you a fit for them?
It's like in recruiter speak, we call those like hot buttons. Mm-hmm. Right. And we, document those, and we actually use those. I actually originally thought, wow, how manipulative this is, but it's actually really smart. No, and the candidates want you to do it, but we actually use those hot buttons when we try to close them, right? So whoever like the final meeting is, maybe it's with the CEO or maybe it's someone, you let them know, like, these are the key things that this person really cares about, leverage that as you're trying to close them. It's just really smart.
Yeah. And even taking it back to why did you take this call? that in itself, their answer to that question right there, that's your retention play down the line, right? So it's like, what caused this person to be on the market? So it's sort of like that, it's like that, this is crass, but that saying about dating, like if they'll cheat with you, they'll cheat on you. It's like, all right, so what caused them to be looking from their old company? Let's make sure that that's not something they say about ours.
Yeah, well, it's funny you mention that because when you look at it's gone. I had a really cool point to make, but I was also trying to look up this crazy study that is like the coolest thing. I'm trying to find it on our blog because it's really cool. But basically what it talks about is the things that make people happy at work versus the things that make them unhappy are actually two separate things. So like when you talked about the hot office, a bad office environment will make someone quit a job, but they will not stay because of a good office environment.
Right.
People will be super engaged and motivated because of career development and like a good relationship with their peers and psychological safety. But those aren't the things that generally like create the bad environment in the back of their head. It's like those things are either absent or they're present and engage them. And the other ones are either satisfactory or actively causing them to be unhappy.
Interesting.
And there was a study by Frederick Herzberg. He did research in the 50s and 60s. And basically he found that there were these sets of events, and like this chart's crazy. So like you can see in this chart here where it's like these are all the things that engage them, and you see they don't really actually detract much, and then all these detractors like pull away. So it's like these are the things that will make people be like, I'm out, it doesn't matter. And these are the things that will actually like motivate them. So it's like there are different things that demotivate you than things that motivate you. Yes. It's like not a spectrum. It's actually like two different scales going against each other.
It's kind of like a salary, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a certain amount that's like, this is just necessary.
Yep.
But you're not going to get the same, like you can't like, it doesn't pay off for you to like offer a little bit more. It's like that. It's almost like the hierarchy of like, what's that one?
Maslow's hierarchy of
Maslow.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Like it's only
Maslow.
like to a certain point, and then it doesn't really matter anymore. Like once you go
Exactly.
above it, you just have to hit the basic part of it, and then it doesn't work anymore.
That's fascinating. Thinking of it like a scale where it's not like either I have this and I stay, or I don't and I go. It's either like I don't and I go, and I have this. Expect like table stakes kind of.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's one of the things I think that Silicon Valley gets in the trap of is like they think like let's add one more perk, but like there's a huge diminishing marginal return on perks.
No one stays for ping pong tables.
Correct. But you'd be amazed how often you see companies that think that like when they have a problem, they need to like have a couple more parties and stuff. Like,
right.
You know, those things won't necessarily help. Like, you know, if you hate your boss, you can be at an amazing company. And I've seen it happen because when my friends leave jobs, I'm like the first one to be like, can we get coffee or beer? I want to know what happened.
Yeah.
And so I hear these stories where it's like they can be at a fantastic company, great reputation, and they were like really proud of their work, but yet they had problems with their boss or their teammates, and like it didn't get better. And so they're like, I just got to the point, like the Steve Jobs quote, you wake up enough mornings unhappy, you have to make a change. And meanwhile, I've also seen people who had really great bosses, and they were like, I went through the gates of hell with this person. Like the company was on fire, and we were trying to save the platform as it was burning, but I stayed because I loved working for my team. I loved the manager. I would work with them again and again, and that's the stark difference you see.
Yes, and if you have someone like that, if you have a manager like that in your organization, that should become part of your like value prop, right? It's like, here are these superstars, like maybe, I don't know, if from a referral standpoint, or maybe like you just sell them, like like if this person inspires so much loyalty, use that, because they're, even if the rest of the company, even if there are no ping pong tables, like they'll still stay for this person.
Yeah, I found in general, it seems like when people start to get in the 30s, they start to appreciate that more. Like once you get a few battle scars, you start to realize like the cool shiny stuff that is really fun and exciting when you're on like an interview and they're showing you around and be like, these are really cool picnic tables where we have like team barbecues and like,
right.
you know, here's our game room and stuff, and they're like shiny and exciting. That luster wears off after you get burned a couple times. And so one of the other things I've found that's really interesting, and I'm wondering if maybe Intello's seen any of that kind of stuff, is this idea that, you know, as you progress in your career, the things that you actually look for at the beginning of the process of searching for a job is actually different. Your values maybe shift and change for what you value most.
Yeah, I'm interviewing for a leadership role on my team, and these are people that have, 20, 30 years of experience, some of them, and it's interesting when we talk about, you know, what's important for you in a role and why are you interested in exploring new opportunities at this time, and you just talk through that. And it's so different when they go through what really matters. They're like, you know what? I'm willing to take a big pay cut.
Yeah.
I just want to work, for a company that has a great culture, a product that I believe in, and a team that's exciting to work with. And you think about it and you're like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it just seems like, anyone would want that. But you're right. When you're younger in your career and you're more ambitious, like those things, don't matter as much. It's like, oh, I want the big fancy salary, and I want the perk, and I want the company car, and I want I want, this fancy title. And, and I'm talking to these these people have been VPs, they've been directors. They're like, I don't care about the title. Like, I just care more about the work I'm doing. I just want to work for a company where I believe in the mission. Mm-hmm. And it's like fascinating that all those things that matter, money, title, all of that, shiny perks, doesn't really matter, once you get later on in your career. So it's really interesting. I'm having to sell, the opportunities here at Intel way differently than I am entry level, roles on my team.
Mm-hmm. As we approach optimal podcast length here and the end of the Google Calendar invite that I sent Jason a few weeks ago, this has been an amazing episode. So much in here, not just related to the recruitment arm, but the talent development, retention. There's just a lot of things at play here. This has been an amazing episode. Jason, Evanish, the company is called Get Lighthouse. Anything else you'd like to plug while you're at it?
Plug? I mean, hey, if your organization's having trouble with this stuff, would love to talk to you and help you out. Otherwise, if you want to keep learning these things, our blog, we have all kinds of free content on there with pretty much any manager question you can think of. We probably have a post that can inspire some cool things you can do. That's totally free. So just getlighthouse.com/blog. We put a lot of effort in that stuff. And so we're just trying to help people out who often don't have a lot of things that can direct them on what to do. And we don't want you to ever feel lost as a manager.
I love it. Jason, you've been an awesome guest. Come back anytime. This has been a blast.
Thanks for having me.
And to all you out there in podcast land, thank you so much for tuning in once more. I hope you liked this episode. I've been Rob Stevenson. You've all been magical, beautiful, wonderful, talented recruiters. Have a spectacular week and happy hunting.